Hi everybody, welcome to the Purpose People podcast. I've got a great guest with us called Bruno from Bruno Scott Consulting, and Bruno's going to be sharing a little bit about business on purpose and helping people around the aspects of B-Corp and all things purpose driven. So welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So Bruno, tell us a little bit about what Bruno Scott Consulting is looking to do and how they're looking to help businesses become more purposeful.
Sure. So Bruno Scott Consulting focuses primarily on B-Corp support, which obviously you know a bit about.
Yeah.
And offers three services from very one-stop, pop in, do a mock assessment. So a company that wants to become a B-Corp has to go through an assessment process, obviously, because there's a set of standards. They've got to get certified. And so I kind of demystify some of that for them, do a mock assessment, let them know where they really are as to whether they're ready to submit, right through to actually managing the whole process for a company. So it kind of depends on where they're at in their journey and what they need from me, really.
So we got a mutual friend called Andy Hawkins.
Yeah, I was going to give him a shout out,
Yeah, so he's done a deep dive on what a B Corp is. So if you haven't listened to it, deep dive on Andy Hawkins and listen to what a B Corp is. But just to touch base, what is a B Corp? Just so the viewers sort of understand what that is and and you know, and how they might be able to engage in that process.
So a B Corp is an organisation that has done an assessment and become certified to become a B Corp, which is a set of standards that means a company is holistically a force for good. So they're not just focused on, for example, organic cotton if they're a t-shirt production, or they're not just focused on their HR services within their organisation. They're actually an all-round, it's more of a holistic set of standards. And there are organisations that are buying into the idea of business being a force for good. And the kind of bigger B Lab, so the organisation behind B Corp, B Lab's theory of change about how we shift from a shareholder-driven economy to a stakeholder-driven economy, and we include the environment as one of those stakeholders.
Right, yeah.
So the money doesn't just go up; it's about distribution of. It's not just about distribution of wealth, but it's about, like I said, a holistic, purposeful way of working.
Yeah. So from my perspective, you know, I started my career, and I use this analogy of how people live out their life, but essentially most people launch into a career, they learn how to do it, they get pretty good at it, so they get in a leadership role, and then ultimately there comes that question from lead to legacy, and I think that's where often people then get stuck and go, I'm not sure this vehicle that I'm currently in is allowed to do that, so they either change job or actually go and start something. And what's been really good for me, having done the podcast for so long and talking to people about B Corp and stuff like this, is that most people have made that jump from lead to legacy. So they might have had to reset and restart in their career, or they've retrained, or they've literally said, you know what, I'm just going to change the business and make it more impactful. And that's been brilliant. And I think COVID for me, the actual journey of COVID where we were locked down, has really got people to think about what they want out of life more. And so I've definitely seen a momentum and this conversation come more to the fore in business than ever. You know, I've been in business for 25 years now, and it's a regular conversation now. How do we make more of an impact? How do we help people? Whereas it's not always been the case. So the fact that you said, you know, rather than more, you know, driven for profit essentially, and we do need profit to make an impact, but purpose is at the heart of the things that we do. So that's really cool. But did you start work with that 100% the core of what you were doing, or was it something that you discovered over a period of time where you wanted to be more purposeful?
I think I had quite a simplistic view of work when I first started. Like, you know, straight out of uni talking first started, and I think it was like, this is work and this is play and this is how I do good. So I've always volunteered alongside whatever I've been doing. So that was in my mind, that was where you did that. And then it was the work was just the work. It was like I was very kind of compartmentalized in my approach. And I think over the kind of last 20 years of work, I've matured in my understanding of how you can make impact. And I've certainly, through working with B Corps, it's amazing to see how companies make impact and how the benefits of resource that can bring and also talent. You know, so a lot of private sector businesses have incredible levels of talent and resource that they can dedicate towards innovation and towards just actual finances towards the cause, if you want to use that as a phrase for a moment. And so it's been really interesting for me to see how people do that. I spent a decade in the charity sector, and I sort of, again, as I went into that sector, I thought this was how you do good. You know, fine. I've now learned that actually there is a world where you can work and do good at the same time. But still keeping kind of like the for-profit sector over on one side of like, well, that's what they're doing and this is what we're doing. And then, as I said, I've matured over the last few years and just realised, no, actually, there's loads of scope for overlap. And actually, you know, thinking about that B-Lab theory of change about how we move our economy, the government and charities can't do that on their own. You need businesses behind it. And so it's been really interesting working with so many fascinating companies, both in terms of what they actually do. I always like to learn about an organisation and what they actually do and why they do it, but also the impacts they can be having along the way as well.
Yeah, it's funny. You're right. You know, experiences of obviously undervalued, but the more experience you get, you begin to see life a little bit differently. And you're like, just when you get it figured out, it's probably when you have to retire. It's like, now I get it. But for me, I was the typical go out there, get a job, be successful in an area, make as much money as possible, whatever. And then when I made the decision to sort of quit the job, I think that was my reset. It seemed quite dramatic at the time. That was my hard reset, like bang, I'm not doing it. And then I was involved on like mission trips, like handing out aid to people in Romania and stuff. But it was only when I was on the minibus where I went, hang on a minute, it's not necessarily my skills and talents and abilities that are the bad thing, it's just how I'm using them. And I think that was a bit of a, oh, okay, I don't know. Although I enjoyed the handing out of aid or whatever, it's you know, driving across Romania in a minibus is not for the faint-hearted. The amount of potholes. But it was a case of, no, actually, we all have skills, talents, and abilities, but maybe we need to channel them, you know, for the betterment of mankind rather than serving oneself. So that was my journey, and I think, you know, when you said, you know, had a fairly compartmentalized view of life, that's not unusual. I've met a lot of people like work is work, and this is this, and this is this, and this is this, and I think life gets a bit more interesting when we don't have those barriers in place and see how it might work, and actually they can all work together.
I think also for a while I was like scared about letting work and life overlap, and maybe that actually speaks volumes about what I felt about the work that I was doing at the time. Rather than that it is that work should be separate, it was more that work should be separate, because I wasn't actually enjoying it, you know. Right at the start. But I had a career coach off the back of my role being made redundant a few years ago, and one of the things they talked about was strengths, and they were saying that in order for something to be a strength, it needs to be something you enjoy, something you do often, and something you're good at. And it's an interesting way of kind of thinking about it, because the enjoyment element in there is really key. So you could be an excellent salesperson, but you're working for an organization you really don't believe in what they're doing, or like you don't align with their mission. Maybe they haven't even got a mission. They're literally like, let's just make money. You know, so, and not that that's a bad thing, by the way. I don't want to put anyone down here. This is more about kind of the opposite side of it, which is about whether it aligns with your level of happiness or your purpose in life, or whatever, you know, so that you feel comfortable about that overlap, because your life is spent at work, so it does overlap whether you want to or not.
I think that's the thing, and that's why I like B-Corp's statement of like saying it's for profit and for purpose, because ultimately you can't help people that are in a poor situation without any money. So you need to generate some wealth and some income. I think for me it's more a case of your values and what you actually value. And it's like you're not compromising your values to make more profit. And I mean, that's the beauty of something like B-Corp, that enables you to be able to do that. And, you know, everyone's got motivations for wanting to make money, but their motivations, I think, help a company if they're clearer about what they are for. And for me, it's a case of, we want to make as much money as possible so that we can do this, that, and the other. And I think when a company doesn't have that, I think then you get a very, I don't know, ambitious, self-driven type company where they're willing to stand. So you create a toxic culture as a result of it. So because everyone's trying to make as much money as possible. And that's why, for me, having been doing a lot of work in the recruitment sector, that's also had a bit of a reputation for that, to see them reinvent, to see them go, you know what, actually, this isn't going to work. Because ultimately, we're there for people. And it's like, we're just taking someone and planting them there, take the commission on, let's move them. And it's like, it's the antithesis of what they should be. And I think that's been good to see, if you like, sectors being reinvented by initiatives such as B-Corp that gets them to think, hang on a minute, do I really want to build a recruitment company that does that? You know, and enhance a horrible reputation. And so that for me is where you see it in a positive light, having a vision more than just money.
And I mean, you know, I said that I went through a maturing. I think the whole Western world's going through a maturing as well. I think that for a long time there's been kind of ethical ways of doing things has been aligned with charities. It's been aligned with hemp wearing, Glastonbury tour, kind of hanging out, kind of banging a tambourine style thing. And again, not to put any of that down, and that's also been a real foundation for a lot of where we are now. But I think we're moving into a space where, as you say, businesses are forced for good, where profits can be put to good purpose. But I still think it doesn't. It's not that it doesn't sit well with some people. I think some people it still jars with them a little bit that an organisation can be for profit and also for doing good. And I think some people still really struggle with that just in their mind, you know. And I think it's an interesting topic when it comes to B Corp, because there's been some conversation around the kind of darker side of it, the cynical side of it. You know, is it a marketing tool? Is it just to sell more stuff? And actually, is consumerism is bad, so therefore is B Corp bad because it's encouraging selling of stuff? And you know, I'm not the voice of B Corp, so I don't want to kind of jump into that argument with 2 feet. But the one thing I would say is that I think consumerism exists. Surely, better consumerism is better than bad consumerism in a way. Like the more companies that join the movement, the better that consumerism will become. And like I said, we need businesses to back it. We need businesses to be a force for good. We need the Better Business Act coming into power. You know, we need all this progress needs to be made, and then people can vote with their money about how they want that progress to happen as well. So
I think what we've got now is potentially more of a conscious consumer. I think that's what's shifted. You know, like going, well, do I really need to buy that? Because I'm going to throw it away in a couple of weeks. You know, so I think that's what's shifted. And I think, you know, you're in any business, you'll see trends on the high street that then begin to, or reflected behind business and stuff like that. So you see it and you pay attention. You go, hang on a minute, why are we doing it this way? Have we thought about doing it slightly differently? You know, like asking questions. I might be buying this T-shirt for £2, but why is it £2? You know, that sort of stuff. You know, the pensions industry, you know, I've invested in high risk pensions, but what funds are they going into? Which we didn't ask these questions 10 years ago. And the concept of clean money, for example. So I think for me, you know, we've got to this point where we're definitely thinking about how to do better, certainly in the Western world. How do we do better? But I think it's a case of there's still a long way to go. You know, when you look at the number of B Corps that exist versus the number of businesses, there is a long journey to go there. So from your perspective then, what's the biggest changes you've seen, I would say in the last couple of years with businesses that are maybe had the conversation about purpose and then actually executing on it? Because you can bring a team together, you can go on an away day. What's the biggest change that you've seen? Have you seen more execution in that journey or?
I mean, one thing I've seen is the number of B Corps. So that those are people who are, or organisations who are putting them, not only putting their money where the mouth is, but they're putting their time and effort where the mouth is, if that makes sense. Not quite as a catchy as saying, but you know, it is on an upward curve. Seeing more and more businesses buy into it, more and more businesses go through the process of becoming certified. Therefore, the community is growing, which means the benefits of being part of that community are growing. And I think that's a little bit of data in a way, just the numbers of companies. But I think that's been one of the biggest changes I've seen in the last couple of years, because it means that other initiatives are getting better backing. So the Better Business Network, like I said, the kind of networking events, the scale of the networking events that are starting to happen. And it bleeds out as well. So I think there are other initiatives that are also getting better support, because organisations who are B Corp and within the impact community, wider impact community, as that community grows, they're able to support each other more. So, you've got the Blue Health Summit happening in Bristol each year now. That's only a few, I mean, I'm probably going to get the number of years wrong, but I think it's like 3 or 4 years old.
Yeah.
And that's a really big event. And that kind of, like I said, I was in the charity sector for a decade, and seeing some of the purpose that some charities have kind of start to come over into the kind of for-profit sector has been really interesting, and how that then feeds into other things like social prescribing. You ever heard of that?
No, go for it. Explain it.
So social prescribing, I'm not going to be an expert on this, so I won't talk very long, but basically the concept is that when you go to a doctor because you've got some ailment, particularly let's say mental health, they can signpost you to some talk therapies potentially, they could give you some medication potentially, but one of the social prescribing is prescribing you, so funding you to be able to attend something that is either nature-based or social-based that would support your well-being and your development.
Interesting.
So you might get a surf lesson paid for, or some outdoor swimming paid for, or a talk club paid for. So we are learning more and more about the connection between green spaces, so the outdoors, and blue spaces being water, and how they positively impact us. And I mean, it's a really massive topic, so I'm trying to ramble through it quickly, and so therefore probably I'm probably not joining the dots that well for the audience, but those concepts from the charity sector are being backed by businesses, creating this wider impact network, impact community, organizations who are trying to work with purpose. And that's feeding into innovation, it's feeding into products, it's feeding into availability, accessibility. I think there's just everything is kind of going in the right direction, but I say that with, like you said, the number of businesses that are doing it is still in the minority compared to the wider business group.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's an interesting thing. One of the reasons why I moved out to the country was for that reason. It was like I got on I think it's on my Twitter, missionary in the concrete jungle.
Yeah,
and the essence is that I was in a city, and I'm always in the city and always trying to do this and the other, but I didn't have that time to unplug. And so it's interesting you talk about the relationship between green and blue, and that effect. Having been in this space, living in the country, I can now chill, whereas I felt I was always on. And chilling isn't just switching the television on and just staring blankly. Chilling is going for a walk or just doing something different. And I think for me, the businesses that are going down that route or allowing for that are seeing their people happier. And we made a decision as a team that we do the 4-day work week. We did that very early on, and so in May 2019 I think we put it in place. We're nearly 5 years into that journey, and we were one of the first. So if you actually Google us, it's got something like, on the BBC, it's like, guy allows people to have time off so they can go surfing or something like that. It's on the BBC.
I vaguely remember that, actually.
Yeah. So that's us. And when you were sharing, you went to the BBC, I ended up getting phone calls from all over the place saying, "Oh, you're doing this," And it was quite simply, is that creatives do their best work when they have space. And the thing that frustrates creatives is having deadlines. And unfortunately, you're in this world that the two always working together. So what we did is we pressed that sort of button that says the creative industry is known for working stupid hours, but we're going to just do that differently and try and force the issue. And I remember when I went and saw my team and I said, look, we're going to do this 4-day work week thing, and they all looked at me like, how are we going to get our work done? And the issue there was that, well, then we need to change our processes, because this is the principle that we want to put into play. We've done it so it's on a 2-week work cycle. So we do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and on Friday they all have it off. And then on the following week it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then there's an R&D day.
Right.
Because again, there's that aspect of when do they research, when do they experiment, and that sort of stuff. And so that's how we implemented 4-day work week as a team. And we've tried to go fully. We've asked what do people want, and everyone's happy with this where we are. And so you got to listen to your people as well. And so for me, it's having that well-being at the heart of the stuff that you do as well that has helped us retain people and have a better culture and be continually creative, because it is like tap on, tap off, tap on, tap off. And for us, it's what can I do as an employer to encourage that creativity? So, you know, that's quite unusual in the creative sector to do that.
I certified an organisation actually that are like a solutions consultancy. So organisations come up with a problem, they figure out what that problem is and how to solve it, is the probably shortest way to describe it. But when I was working through all their benefits as part of the assessment, one of the things they did is they gave people a budget to spend one day out of the office in a public space, like somewhere where they would get creative input from, influences and inspiration from. And they also had a budget that they would go to once a month. They get a paid cultural event as well. So again, just kind of keeping those creative
good idea.
Influences coming through, so that people aren't just like stuck at the desk trying to be creative in a space where maybe they've got burnout going on or something, you know. And I really liked that, because I think we've all felt that, you know, pandemic, loss of outdoor, not outdoor because you could go outdoors, but a loss of like connection with fellow human beings and cultural events, live music, all these sorts of things, whatever your thing is as a person, it would have disappeared. And you noticed it, you know?
Yeah, well, no, one of the companies we've been working with, so they're a company called Motion, and we've been building, one of my other companies is a software company, we've been building like an events calculator that looks at the environmental impact of an event. Yeah. And anyway, it was one of the teams, I think it was their Christmas do, so they invited us along, and we went along. And I remember being stood in the pub at the Old Duke in Bristol, listening to live music, and it was the first time I've done that for about 4 or 5 years since the pandemic. You just don't. And I was like, yeah, that's a lot better than just sat on a Zoom listening to it. Do you know what I mean? Being in that environment and stuff. So I think there's always that aspect of personal connection is really important. But I think for me, it's that the people connection, giving people time to be more creative out of the office. I sometimes feel that my week is so different. Like today we're doing podcasts, tomorrow I'm in London. You know, it's always very varied, and it's making sure that the rest of the teams are varied or enjoyable at the very least, rather than just like this, I need to get this job done.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned that about the music, and some of the other things you're talking about makes you think about people. And I think for me, when I see a live music, you see the person doing it. On a CD, you just hear the music and think, like, that's great. But when you're actually seeing the human being doing it, it also makes you think about how much effort they've had to put in to get there, how much like talent they have. And, you know, you can't see someone in the street and know that they're a musician. It's like a hidden talent, which I quite like as well. But I think with B-Corp, with impact, with purpose, all of that, it's all people-based. Even like if you're a tech company, you can't be a tech company without people. And so, as you said, it's about how do you support your people, how do you work with your people, and it's about what creative and innovative ideas those people can come up with to solve challenges for your business, or for ways to be your business in a better way, which I find really interesting as well. There's like an overlap between people and process that I always find really interesting about this stuff.
It's an interesting one with like Microsoft. So Microsoft, you know, they've got a division of autistic people. So they worked out the neurodiverse, you know, it is about people, but they're not necessarily good in conversation, let's say. So they were like, well, hang on a minute, how do we engage? Because we need these types of people to do what we're doing. And they obviously now have got a division that is, we get where you're coming from. They've got experts that can facilitate them, celebrate the neurodiversity, but not make them feel odd or weird or anything like that, and become a really good asset to the company. So it's those sorts of initiatives that have been really good to see company culture. So that leads me on to, what do you think from your perspective, what would be the key components to a decent company culture?
That's a massive question. I think we'd need.
All right, let's find five.
No, but okay, I mean, one of the things I like about B-Corp, and I'm going to bang on it about it a little bit because I do believe in it. That's why I'm working in it. I don't think it's the only standard out there. I also don't think it's perfect. You know, there's also criticism. That's all totally fine. You have to engage with a real topic, and it's a real topic. But one of the things I like about it is the business impact assessment you have to go through to get there is like a nice, neat roadmap for a company who maybe doesn't have ESG experts in their organisation, right? And within that, they've got a workers section, and within that particularly in the evolution of standards that's coming out over the next year or so, there is a part on workplace culture. And so how do you create a good workplace culture? Because that is an important part of it.
Yeah.
For me, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer to that, but I think some of the key elements are not necessarily about what the culture is as an output, but more about how you create that output. So like you were saying, it's about listening to your people. I think that's a really key part, not just bottom down. Organisation I've seen who have a lot more level playing field in terms of feedback and ideas. I worked with a company that had a kind of two-stage test for a way of doing ethical business. So when a client came to them, they had to check whether the client satisfied their ethical test and also whether the project satisfied their ethical test. And the whole company voted on it. And if it got any less than 50%, they didn't take the work.
Wow.
And so as an employee, and they asked everyone, not even the people who'd be working on it. So you could be working on the front desk, or you could be the web designer or whatever. You still got a say in terms of the business that you're working with. And I think that empowerment is a really powerful piece of how you create a positive culture. That engagement is a huge piece. Beyond that, I think there's perks, how you create an atmosphere within your company as well. What does that mean? How does that tie in with your mission? How does it tie in with who your identity as a company? How do you get people involved in that? So I think there's like a myriad of ways of doing it, but I definitely think empowering, engaging, those are two really, really key bits in terms of how you create a culture. And I think respect and investment are the other two. So like I said, it's a massive topic. You could talk for ages, and also I have friends who specialise in this sort of stuff, so I don't want to.
We'll get them on.
Yeah. But I think like investing in it. I think a lot of people just think, oh well, we had an office day, so that'll do. It's like no, because there's going to be different types of people within that. Did some people want a massive group setting and drinks? Some people want to have something a bit more quiet or like an activity. Like this, it's difficult to like crystallize it into
it's
an
changed
idea.
though. I mean, in my days, in the creative industry, it was always about, there was money behind the bar and that was it. That was the depth of it. And, in essence, it's people getting to know one another, but that also creates its own problems in a sense. I think I love what you said about the company looking at the client and then deciding if it's the right fit or not, and I've started to listen to that. There were some clients where in the past we would always get the same problem with an individual talking to someone in not a great way, and then we're like, oh, that's a bit of a red flag, and the feedback we're getting is like that red flag's getting deeper red, we need to do something about it, for example. But like for instance, when I was working at an agency that I was going to run and I walked from, it was a case of the sector they were involved in was ending people's lives rather than celebrating them. But when they push a 350 grand check on the table and say, that's in your bank tomorrow, do you want to do the work? And they got stakeholders in mind. That's a very different scenario, because of course the owner's going to make a decision there. He's not going to go and consult anyone. So I think that's a really cool thing, that if you've got a core set of values and a core set of culture, I think that determines it anyway. They just know that the minute you brief that in, it's like, well, that doesn't fit what we're about. Generally it will come because people are invested in what you're trying to do. So I think culture, having those parameters of it, it's not necessarily where you arrive, it's the decision making parameters. I think it's a really cool thing to look at. That's why values is so good.
And it was interesting listening to him, the guy that founded the company. Listening to him talk, he was saying that they turn away about 6 bits of business a year minimum on average, and he was just like, it's still scary because every time you turn it away, he's got that entrepreneur's mindset of like, when's the next one coming? And this is a company, they've got employees, they're successful, but he's still got that little bit of fear in the back of his head, and so there's that element of risk. You got to put your money where your mouth is.
Well, it's interesting. I think it was, I did a little bit. I remember doing a bit of research at the time. So the brand Innocent Drinks, they started off at Covent Garden, pressing a whole load of, fruit together and then selling it, and they built this business. And they were heavily criticised when they eventually sold out to Coca-Cola. But for 500 million, you've got to be a brave person. And I think the conclusion they got to was, look, we're going to take the 500 million, but we'll do good with that 500 million. And at some point they had to weigh it up. And, until you're in that chair, where you're literally moments away, I don't think you can criticise. But I think their values got them to that point, and then obviously the exchange of cash that come their way allows them to do other things. And as long as they don't forget themselves in the process, I mean, I haven't done too much research since, but the point of it is, you could argue everyone's got a price before they compromise, but I think it's not that. Their answer was actually quite good when they've said, yeah, but 500 million from Coca-Cola, look at the good we could do with it. You know, let them win, you know, sell the company to them, but you know, maybe there's a grace period and then they could start you know, innocent too, or not so innocent.
Well, also I think there's an element about embracing risk in all of it as well. Like I think you can't, both in terms of being a business and an entrepreneur, but also in terms of how we drive forward standards and working with impact. You know, Dan Asuski, who used to be the head of standards at B Lab Global, so the people behind B Corps, he wrote a whole article about how we need to embrace risk to further the movement, because you need to engage with companies who maybe are on the fringes of it, or maybe even beyond the fringes of impact. Otherwise, how are we ever going to move this forward? How are we going to improve anything? You know, you don't improve by becoming a monoculture or by becoming an echo chamber. You've got to go out and engage with people. And so by obviously in there, the power is necessarily the wrong way around, because Coca-Cola were buying Innocent. But maybe by that brand going into being part of Coca-Cola, they have a positive impact within Coca-Cola, or maybe they have their distribution grows, so their kind of mission and ethos gets spread further. You know, I think there's ways of doing it. I think it's definitely not black and white. You know? No,
and I think, you know, like for someone as large as Coca-Cola, for example, having been around as long as they have, they might have come up with things that they never even considered. You know, let's argue that Innocent pot their stuff in plastic bottles, whereas Coca-Cola pot them in glass. You know, there's that journey to have a discussion around and stuff like that. So I think having a company with over 100 years of insight is going to help someone with 15, 25 years worth of insight. So I think you're right. I mean, there has to be that conversation of saying, no, this is not a closed circle, it's an open circle. And there may be things that we can do better, but you recognize the scale of the operation versus that's actually, you can't scale that way. So why do they want to scale? Is it purely cash driven, or have they got a foundation that they're giving to or whatever? So I like that. Let's have that conversation. You engage with those bigger businesses that are known as monsters and say, well, are you really monsters, or is that because we're not as big as you and we're tarring you with that monster brush? You know, interesting if Coca-Cola become a B Corp.
Well, interesting. Nespresso became a B Corp, and I think they were the biggest one. I think there's now been betted. There's now a bigger one that's joined the community, I think. But,
because that was all about the disposals. That was
and so there was a lot of backlash within the B Corp community. And I think that's one of the biggest differences with B Corp versus some other environmental standards or ESG standards, is it does have a community behind it as well. And that's really amazing, because you can form connections and you can learn from the community and you can feel empowered by the community and it can grow. But the flip side is there's also some gatekeeper elements within that as well, and people writing open letters about stuff. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing to do, because actually that raises awareness of an issue maybe people didn't know about, or maybe the B Corp community didn't know about until somebody finds it out. You know, like how are you supposed to police 8,000 companies across the world, right? But it's just interesting about that kind of community element and how people feel truly part of B Corps, to the extent that they will write a letter about another company because they're not adhering to what they believe is a B Corp standard, you know? And I think that's really interesting as well in terms of engaging that conversation as well.
But it's a conversation, right? And that's the thing, is the conversations are being had, whereas before they weren't. And I think, you know, like even the aspect of looking at farming, for example, you know, agriculturally, you know, how do you engage a farmer to be, you know, better to the environment versus they're not making profit because they're being hammered down by the ugly supermarkets? Do you know what I mean? So I like the fact that you can engage in those conversations to be better, But I think for me, and maybe it's because I got older, a bit more mature, as we talked about. Whereas I don't always see those large organisations as necessarily the enemy anymore.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, well, they're doing something at scale, like Sainsbury's. Let's use them as an example. They're massive. They've been trading for many, many, many years. So surely we could learn from them of how they got to there. And I'm sure there's some stuff that they could do better. But maybe the amount of diesel that they use in their trucks is a reason, because there's no electric trucks that can go the distances that they travel, for example. Elon, pull your finger out. It's those sorts of things, because we don't think about that. We see it as, well, can't they just deliver it on a bike? Well, yeah, they could, but if you tried pulling 10 tons of stuff on a bike, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So their problems are much larger, but at least they're having the conversation. So I think when I hear that a large organisation has become a B Corp, Apple becoming a B Corp could be a huge. But then they would have to address a whole load of things. But if they did and they passed the assessment, isn't that better?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's what I think my kind of argument boils back to is like, trying to be better is the root here, right? Trying to do business better, trying to have a better impact. And so whichever way an organisation's trying to do that, all power to them. Yeah. But if we get more bigger organisations on board, then they will have more impact. Because I mean, I don't even know how many employees Apple has, but if they satisfied the B Corp standards, then that their worker section, they will be working really well with all of those employees, and that's a huge amount of influence. Yeah. People talk about greenhouse gas emissions and calculating your scope 1, 2, 3 emissions. Yep. But you could almost think of that in a social version. And so as an organisation, you've got your social impact within your building, and then you've got the social impact of all your employees going home and who they can interact with and how they interact and how they're able to interact because of the salary you're giving them or the benefits you're giving them, Yeah. So there's almost like a scope 1 and 2 of social impact within your employment workforce as well. So I think, the more bigger organisations that B Corp can get on board, the better for everyone, I think. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and there's certain things, because it when you're talking to loads of businesses in different sectors, which is, I guess, the benefit that B Corp has, is that when you turn around and say, oh, well, print is evil for the environment, and you go, well, no, not necessarily. Those servers that are smashing out 10,000, 20,000 emails might actually be doing more. And it's like, well, I didn't know that. And so it allows us to break some of the mythology behind certain things and get to the root cause and the truth and say, well, how do we work better on both sides? And so for me, that's what's been exciting about, being part of the B Corp movement, being around people like yourself and Andy and stuff like that, just inspiring people to do better for the world and doing business better, which is ultimately a really good thing, Yeah, it's interesting you say about servers, actually, because I was talking, Weka. I was doing some talks with Weka. And it came up about servers because there was a tech company there who's a B Corp, and they were like, the B Corp doesn't even discuss how you store your data, but that takes a massive amount of energy and creates a huge amount of emissions. And somebody else in the group then linked us to a BBC article where there was a guy in, I think it's Exeter, and they are heating their council swimming pool through a server that's about the size of a fridge. Wow. And that heats the whole pool year round. And you're like, that's insane. How much energy that must be. And he's now in talks to do it with about 7 other council-run pools as well. Well, this is the thing, isn't it? We're talking about cryptocurrencies and stuff like that, and it's all the services that are generating Bitcoin or mining for it. Yeah. People don't consider that. Oh, it's a crypto coin, it should be fine. It's like, no, do you know how much energy that's invested in that? So I like the fact that these conversations are happening. And for me, having been Peter B Corp and being in that journey got me to ask deeper questions. And the point is, the conversation continues. It doesn't just stop. There's no full stop. It's a comma to the conversation. It's all about progress, not perfection. I mean, that's the I've actually had a few people say, like the cynical side. I think some people are just doing it as a tick box thing to get the logo and try and make more money. But my experience of it is, even if that was someone's motivation going into it, that was probably the motivation before they learned more about it. And the process of learning more about it, most companies I've worked with or come across in the B Corp community seem to be engaged with it and actually want to do better. So even if they came in with some like money grabbing ulterior motive, if you're doing good for bad reasons, is that not still doing good? And B, actually, I think from my experience, most people kind of come on board. They get it. Like, it's not an easy process. You can't just go, no, I'm going to be a B Corp next month because I think it'll make us more money. Like, it takes 6 to 12 months for a lot of companies to get themselves ready. You know, and then several months to actually go through the assessment process. So you can't just kind of fib your way in and kind of slide through.
No, and I think that's what's been good about it. I think, and you're right. You know, there's some more cynical people say, "Oh, well, I'll give it a go," and then they did it, and they're like, "Oh, actually, this is," even down to the aspects of retention, because the workforce that's coming through now are demanding more from companies. And I mean, that's probably the biggest thing, is that, you know, companies that could get away with stuff many years ago can't so much now because the standards are coming from bottom up as well. You know, I want to work for a B Corp. You know, I was talking to one of the recruitment companies we work with. They said that's one of the things that come up. Do you know any other companies that are B Corp? Because I want to work for them as opposed to someone else. And, you know, I do say to them, it's like, yeah, it's a long process. So probably the best place to start is sustainable development goals. Maybe pick a couple of those and build the business around that to start off with. Just get used to a vision bigger than oneself, so to speak. But yeah, I highly recommend it. It's a good process, and, you know, can only get better for the businesses out there. So
I think also the other thing that I find impressive about it on a kind of movement, so that wider theory of change about how we shift our economy, the tool is free to use. You have to pay to get certified because that's intellectual property, because you're going to get the logo. But the tool is free to use, and there are 250,000 global users of the software. So people are using it to better their ESG goals or standards before they've even certified. And they may never even certify because they may not have the funds to do it, or they may not. They realize they don't hit the 80-point mark. Whatever it is, I think there's something. It's a not-for-profit organisation, and I think that's so commendable that software is still free to use.
Yeah, no, it's really good. It's really good. For me, it's good to have standards, but it's good to have standards around doing better. And I think that was, you know, many moons ago, I was thinking of a thing called the Ethical Media Network, and I saw something the other day. I think it was on your post about the creative charter. You know, I was like, you know, it was an idea I had, and I put it to the side and it was around. I saw stuff that going on in the media that was just not right, and how do you then get creative agencies to prescribe to a standard? You know, like working someone crazy hours every day of the week for 2 years solid, you know, they're doing 18 hours a day. That's not right. But in some gaming industry environments, that's the norm. And they're like, well, if you don't like it, we'll get some other guy that's willing to do it, or girl that's willing to do it. So for me, having that structure or that format can only be a good thing. Whether you actually go whole hog and put a B or not, there's something there now that you can measure against. So it's really cool.
It's just a shorthand, isn't it?
So how would someone get in touch with you and find a little bit more about maybe shaping their organization to do good? Not necessarily they're doing bad, but at least you know, get better at what they're doing, and engage with you and have a conversation.
So I'm on LinkedIn. So Bruno Scott, look me up on LinkedIn. On there, I've got a services page which explains my services, and you can also click a button and book a call with me to just have an introductory chat, and see if I can work with you to support you on your kind of impact journey, really.
Well, it's been really good. I really enjoyed our conversation, you know, businesses and doing good and that sort of stuff. And we'll get you back, I'm sure.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks, Darrell. Cheers.
Thanks, man. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Purpose People podcast. How you can help us is to like and subscribe our YouTube channel. You can also subscribe to our podcasts on Apple, Spotify, Google and Amazon. That helps us get our message out there to help people go after their dreams, double down on it, and be successful in life on their terms.